Welcome to meeting number 115 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Science and Research. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. All witnesses and participants have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. We have both our witnesses online today and several committee members as well. I'd like to remind all members of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Members, please raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or via Zoom. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. Thank you all for your cooperation. Pursuant to Standing Order 1083I and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, October 31st, 2024, the committee resumes its study of the impact of the criteria for awarding federal funding on research excellence in Canada. So this is basically a rerun or continuation of the meeting we attempted to have on Tuesday, which had to be aborted due to technical difficulties with our audio. So I'm very glad that two of our witnesses are able to come back again. We're going to start, just a restart for the continuity. We have many new committee members here present today that didn't hear anything before. And so I think that's good that we do a fresh start. So it's now my pleasure to welcome as an individual, Dr. Philip Kitcher, John Dewey Professor Emeritus of Philosophy, by video conference, and also by video conference today, Dr. John Robson, Executive Director, Climate Discussion Nexus. So up to 5 minutes will be given for your opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. Dr. Kitcher, I invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
He's on mute.
I'm sorry, you're on mute? Would you like to start again? You were on mute. Thank you.
I think I'm now live. So once again, I'm most grateful for the invitation to speak to you. I also want to thank the chair for allowing me to have a second chance to introduce myself. In light of Tuesday's partial meeting, I now feel I have a much better understanding of the issues with which you're concerned. 30 years ago, I was invited by the Library of the United States Congress to write a report on the promise and the potential problems that would result from the Human Genome Project. That led me to write a book in which I explored some of the ethical, legal, and social implications of that project. In the decades since, a significant part of my research has attempted to provide an account of how scientific research should bear on policies within a democratic society. The first thing I want to say today is that the public funding of scientific research is essential to a healthy use of scientific technology. Nations that cannot support their own research are dependent on efforts made in other places. Frequently, they find themselves unable to acquire solutions for their own special problems. To cite one notorious example, African children suffered for a long while from river blindness because their countries could not manufacture or purchase the pertinent drugs. The foreign companies that designed those drugs found it more profitable to manufacture cosmetics for rich members of their societies. There are two obvious consequences of abandoning public funding, and they're disastrous. The first is the emigration of the most successful native researchers. The second is the privatization of research, with the predictable result that the research done will be tailored to the needs of the wealthy. That tends to be where the profits are. And I'll add something to the text I sent, namely that I don't think it is wise to have only private companies and private ventures involved in the development of AI. In a democratic society, research should attempt to meet the most urgent needs of the citizenry, all the citizens. Most nations have contained populations whose needs have previously been ignored. If when that's recognized, it appears that too much emphasis is placed on a previously neglected group, a new balance may need to be struck. But the original decision to address the needs of that group was a properly ethical choice. It shouldn't be dismissed as ideology. Researchers should not quit the public research sphere in fits of pique. Rather, they should work with those who make funding policy, explaining the corrections they envisage. There has to be a dialogue involving researchers and representatives of the most urgent needs of all the population. Working out the proper relationship between the perspectives of the research community and the hopes of those who are currently experiencing difficulties is a complex business. It requires a painstaking process of ethical inquiry. Much of my work during the past 30 years has attempted to develop a model for how that inquiry might go. And I'll be delighted to say more about that today, because I think that is the real, deep, and difficult problem. Thank you.
Very much for those opening remarks. Now we will turn to Dr. Robson. I invite you to make your opening statement of up to 5 minutes. I'm sure it'll go much more smoothly today.
Well, that wouldn't be a hard bar to clear, but I thank you very much for inviting me and indeed for inviting me back to present what I think is perhaps a different perspective than that of the previous witness, because you're gathered here to talk about pondering the impact of the criteria for awarding federal funding on research excellence in Canada. And I'm here to urge you, rather than refining the criteria, to get rid of them and also all the funding involved. And I say this for two reasons. The first being that you, as members of Parliament, are the critical link between citizens and the whole political process. In the massive apparatus of government, you are the only people that we choose. And you have core duties that you must attend to that at the moment, not to be uncivil, are being carried out very badly. You need to be peering into the public accounts, not the test tubes. The second point, and those of you who were here for the first try will know this, I come from an academic family. Both my parents are professors, my uncle, two cousins. My grandfather was not just a professor, he was an expert on the evolution of Parliament. My quotation of the day online today, in fact, is from him. But our universities are in a mess today, and one of the primary reasons why is that they've become creatures of the state. Now, of course, it may be occurring to some of you that education is in fact constitutionally provincial, and you're right. Nevertheless, the federal government somehow seems to spend something on the order of $15 billion a year on post-secondary education, and I don't think that it's doing much good. But more to the point, when I speak of your core duties, the first one I want to mention is the national finances. Solvency. It is a critical thing, and yet we are facing massive deficits, and we just got this weird Christmas tax break that's apparently going to save each of us $4.51 and cost firms millions to administer. So I urge you to put aside genetic codes and look at the tax code. And even responsibilities defense of the realm. And I'm just drawing here on very recent news stories. Canada is defenseless in the Arctic. We have no assets there worthy of the name. And in fact, we are defenseless generally in an increasingly dangerous world. So again, I tell you to forget about antimatter and get us some ammunition and somebody capable of firing it. And other critical federal responsibilities, infrastructure, but a news story revealed that Via Rail is getting subsidies exceeding $1,000 a passenger, but it can't make the trains run on time. And then some minister was promising finally a human right to clean drinking water for First Nations and long-term sustainable funding for generations. What we really have is boil water advisories for generations. So again, I say forget heavy water and fix the tap water. And then there was the story about the federal court maybe having to curtail hearings because they have such a funding shortfall. You know, nothing is more fundamental to peace, order, and good government than justice, except defense. But justice is collapsing as well in this country. You could wait almost a year just to get a hearing on a traffic ticket. I assure you that's true. And this is happening even though federal spending has ballooned from under $300 billion a decade ago to over $500 billion today. The national debt is over $1 trillion, and the federal public service is up a baffling 40%. So you as MPs need to make this stuff stop. Never mind inventing a Canadian bilingual chatbot. And I do think there's a certain irony in the fact that the hearings fell apart last time because we couldn't actually manage translation. Is there anything that the federal government ought to be more on top of than that? So, I would say more about the universities, but time is short. Bruce Party and Heather Exner-Pirro both spoke about that. So I want to come back to this point that leave education to the provinces. It's bad enough with them in charge. And when you cut, if you cut the spending, I'm talking about that $15 billion, to end on a slightly more cheerful note, take about $1 billion of it and buy yourself some staff. I worked on the Hill almost 30 years ago, and I discovered that the U.S. Congressional House of Representatives Budget Committee alone had about 100 staff. Representatives have close to 20. Senators have dozens. And a lot of them are doing admin or constituency work, but they've got, 5 or 10 full-time policy people to keep them on top of what's happening. You don't have, you're lucky to have 5 staff total. And I'll tell you what, Cabinet, the party leaders and the bureaucracy do not want MPs on top of issues because it makes you less docile. They want to distract you, and this is a distraction. Laser beams, that's for cats to chase. We citizens need legislators who are focused on fundamentals, not cold fusion. Because right now, in the central responsibilities of government,
that's our time. I'm going to stop you there.
And it shows.
I'm sorry. I do need to caution you as well. We are still having some trouble with your sound today. I know I hear a little fuzziness. So when you're answering questions, I think I'm going to have to ask you to speak a little slower, just so that we hope your sound comes through. So thank you both for your opening remarks. Now we're going to open the floor to questions, and please be sure to indicate to whom your questions are directed. So we'll start that off, please, with MP Tucker for 6 minutes.
Yes, we're going to just talk academia for a bit to start here, a little bit of the current landscape in the States, and then Canada. It would be interesting to hear our witnesses' take on it. In terms of just some of the costs associated that universities spend money on is the DEI programs. And we see American universities such as the U of M, University of Michigan, have spent over $250 million in the past few years, and 56% of that cost was salaries. And got me thinking, how expensive is this project in Canada? Does any of the two witnesses want to take a stab at what that might be? No, it would be probably into the millions, if not billions. And this is while we have a crisis where every university, every group that comes in here that represents students or professors or research is asking for more money. And we have dollars that the taxpayer has provided Ottawa to provide studies, such as and I'll open this up if any of you two that have comment, University of Waterloo for $37,524 from furries to sports fans. This is the study that was done at the University of Waterloo. Any comments on that spend?
Yeah, if I may, the thing is, it's not just the direct cost, large as it is, and universities, being creatures of the state, are hugely bureaucratic these days. It's the impact on education and morale. At our universities, pro-Israel speakers are chased away by thugs, whereas people are invited in to spew anti-Semitism. There was just a lounge open somewhere that's for non-whites only. This kind of thing is not just a monetary cost. It's hugely demoralizing. And there's another thing, because you talk, and the Bouchard report talks about this DEI and how we must have this and that perspective and so on. But Jonathan Kay once said, okay, who wants to be first up in the oral tradition-powered rocket? So it forces people to make claims about the nature of knowledge which they know are false. And that's deeply corrupting. And that would not happen in private universities. To privatize universities is not to destroy higher education, it's to reinvigorate it.
Thank you. And along that vein...
May I say something?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Look, I think it's terribly easy to pick out one program that sounds as though it's incredibly fruity and start in on it. It's very easy to target something that, as Senator Proxmire did for many, many years in the United States, something that seems to be worthy of the Golden Fleece Award, as he called it. But to be honest, what you should be looking at is the whole statistics. You should be looking at the track records of research programs in various universities, and you should be looking at which ones of those seem to have led to profitable and useful things, not necessarily financially possible, but humanly possible, that have issued in results that have made human lives go better. That's the sort of statistical basis you need. Don't please wave your hands in the direction of something that comes to you in a catchy phrase and think necessarily that that's indicative of the whole thing. And with respect to DEI,
I'm just going to go on to the next question.
Okay.
I'd like to explore a little bit more of what Dr. Robinson talked about on campus. We have heard testimony on the importance of diversity of viewpoints as opposed to conformity. The critics say is currently pushing by universities. Could you elaborate on the benefits of viewpoints of diversity and the ways in which modern universities harm that? And that example that you highlighted is one of the areas that I believe is harming our society.
Well, my own story, and I've taught at 4 major North American universities, and I've also worked in 2 of Canada's major think tanks. But I taught at the University of Calgary my first year, and I went to see the chairman at the end of my year, and I said, I'd love to stay on. This is great. I think the students like me. I have good reviews and so on. And he said, oh, we wouldn't have hired you if we'd known you were conservative. And I said, that seemed a little bit strange. And he said, oh, no, we just don't like ideology. And I said, with respect, sir, we're sitting in your office under a 6-foot red square silk flag of Che Guevara. And he said, that's just decoration. But at the end, I also had a student tell me, I'm a graduating senior in history. I've been here 4 years. You're the first professor I ever heard criticize the Soviet Union. And that was in Calgary. And that was 30 years ago. This is not a healthy environment. This is not a place where students are being exposed to a variety of viewpoints and challenged. And it's worse in the humanities than it is in science, but it's getting into the sciences too. And this is not
just to cut you off. I got one last question. That if we run out of time, please submit a brief for both the last question and this one to fully explain your answer. In terms of peer review, though, in your view, is it currently fitting the purpose that we have peer review in our studies?
Totally broken. It's PAL review. The reviewers aren't paid. They don't go and look at the data. They just sort of go, yeah, that sounds all right. And Retraction Watch publishes. You get this endless retraction of peer-reviewed papers. The system is busted through and through. And the idea that, it's got to be public because a private system would be corrupted. The public system is deeply corrupted.
Thank you very much for your testimony today.
Mr. Kitcher, you have time to chime in for a little bit if you'd like. Do you have an answer on that, or no? Oh, you muted yourself. Maybe you could submit an answer in writing then so that we can move on. Thank you. Okay, we will now turn to MP Chen for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you again to the witnesses and for coming back to today's meeting. I'll start off with Professor Kitcher. You spoke about the dangers of the privatization of research. Could you tell us a bit more? Do you have any examples in which privatization of research is tailoring to the needs of wealthy or to powerful corporations that does not necessarily support broad research for the greater public good?
It's all over parts of the pharmaceutical industry. You only need to look very broadly at the kinds of drugs that are made, the kinds of drugs that are marketed, the ways in which, for example, drugs that are addictive were pushed. I'm thinking of things like the Sackler family. There is a huge amount of stuff that doesn't get produced because it would do good, even though it would do good, because it turns out to be unprofitable. There's this is a terribly sad story. So co-authored a study with a young student at Columbia early in the 20th century, or 21st century, where we actually took a hard look at the ways in which the needs of people around the world were being met by Big Pharma. It has gotten much better than that in the years since, but it's still got a lot wrong with it. Privatization is driven by profit motives, and people who can't pay don't tend to get the drugs they need, even when those drugs have already been developed.
There's been a lot of conversation around, pharmaceuticals and the insurance industry, given the recent events in the U.S. But with respect to the example you just gave, would you say that more public funding is needed to support research that is not created in the interest of powerful corporations and for-profit motives?
Yes, I would say that. In my view, this is terribly important. I must confess, Dr. Robson comes from a family of academics. I come from a family of poorer people, and I was a great beneficiary, and my mother before me was a great beneficiary of the fact that various medicines were universally available in Britain to people who couldn't pay. That is something which any serious ethical medical system should strive to replicate. And if the drug companies are making that impossible, then the drug companies should be regulated.
I'll turn over to Dr. Robson. You talked about universities acting as preachers of the state. You have a doctorate. Your family, as you said, includes professors. What are your thoughts on academic freedom? Do you believe that it currently exists and that professors, researchers, graduate students have academic freedom to pursue the research interests that they are interested in pursuing?
I think academic freedom is in very, very poor shape these days. I mean, the atmosphere on campuses, if you speak up in class, if you say that you're in favor of free markets, never mind that you're in favor of Israel, or that you think there might be some arguments in favor of America's role in the world, you really do risk getting chased off campus, sometimes literally chased off campus. And if you are putting in a grant, of course you have to say, and this will help with climate change, and this will help with DEI. All of these things are obligatory nowadays. And I think, again, this is just very, very harmful. And when I went to college, again, this was years ago, my father said, don't study English. The profession's lost its mind. But by the way, I should mention my father's parents never owned a car. My grandfather, who made good, was the poor boy on scholarship. So I can play the poverty card too if it will help my credibility here. But the critical point is that, as John Stuart Mill said, the state should require that children get an education and make sure they can afford it. But a state-delivered education is a contrivance for molding people into conformity, and this is what universities now do. The one who pays the piper calls the tune. And I want to add, I think it's a very impoverished vision that if they're privatized, all they'll do is sell to the highest bidder. What they'll do is they will go out and raise money philanthropically in large amounts from the generous people who live in our wealthy country based on their devotion to research. It's not a matter, and you see that what's happening in the pharmaceutical industry. What have our lavish subsidies done about that? The Soviet Union had purely public sector research for 70 years and didn't invent one single useful drug.
But if I can very quickly go back to Professor Kitcher, what do you say to calls to eliminate equity, diversity, and inclusion in research?
You're on mute. Dr. Kitcher, there.
Sorry, I think they're premature. But I'm prepared to believe that too much emphasis has been placed upon them at cost to other people. One of the things that I said very briefly in my opening statement was that you have to attend to the needs of all of the citizens. And the fact that some group has been marginalized in the past gives it some right to have that treatment repaired. but it doesn't necessarily, that should not come at the cost of marginalizing others.
That's a little bit over our time, but I wanted you to finish your thought. So we'll now turn to MP Blanchard-Chocard for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je salue les témoins qui sont avec nous pour cette...
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome to our witnesses. My first question is Professor Kitcher. Professor, you mentioned in your work that science needs to be democratic, and EDI rejects individual on the basis of extrinsic criteria. Could you comment, please?
Professor, you're on mute.
I'm sorry, I can't understand what the question is. I speak some French, but I cannot follow all of the words that the questioner is posing.
There's a translation option at the bottom of the screen.
Yes, at the bottom of the screen, you can hit English, and then you'll get the translation for you.
It's that thing that looks like a globe.
3 little dots, like at the bottom of the screen, usually you'll see more. If you click on them, you got it? Great. Shall we, here, I'm going to stop the time. So do you want to re-ask your question so that he can hear the English translation?
Est-ce qu'on peut faire le test de...
Could we make a quick test to see whether Professor Kitcher is hearing the interpretation? Are you hearing the English interpreter?
I'm afraid not. I'm just hearing the French.
Okay, let's
On my
suspend.
browser, it's not the 3 dots for more. It's the thing to the left of that that looks like...
Do you want to repeat the question one more time?
La Présidente, je débute.
Madam Chair, I'll begin again. Professor Kitcher, in your work, you often state that science needs to be democratic. Do you believe that EDI policies that reject individuals on the basis of extrinsic criteria, that reject them from scientific excellence, are those democratic?
I don't think they are democratic. That's a very simple answer.
C'est bien, on poursuit.
Right. Many witnesses have stated that there's a lack of ideological representation and that those who dare think differently from established standards are being the inverse of democratic. You even seem to reject the exclusion principle in and of itself. Do you believe that research, that democratizing research would improve representation or even inclusion without the need to use selective policies?
I do think that the procedures that you've described are undemocratic and wrong. What I think has been good about the DEI proposals has been that it's brought into the research community and into the teaching community a number of people whose voices had not previously been heard. That is a very good thing. It is not a good thing when you start then excluding people on the grounds that they don't meet those previously marginalized standards. So I said earlier that the problem with a policy to compensate people who have previously been marginalized is that implementing that policy may then marginalize another group. And what you're pointing to in your question is that that has happened here, and that is wrong. So what you've done is created a new set of marginalized people, and that's the same kind of wrong you were originally trying to correct. So the policy is not only wrong, it's fundamentally morally inconsistent.
Merci pour cette réponse. Le professeur Yves Gingras avait...
Thank you. Professor Gingras stated before the committee that science is a universal issue and it's not relevant to attribute an ethnic identity to innovation. In your view, EDI policies, might they break the scientific universalism and quest for truth with a more essentialist, while targeting a more essentialist objective?
Yes, they do run the danger of doing that, but I think it's fairly well understood. I think there's good psychological evidence on this. There's good social evidence on this, that having a number of different perspectives within the research and teaching community brings epistemic benefits, that is, benefits with respect to finding out and justifying the truth. So I think what is good about this policy is the way that it has diversified the research community. A secondary good is that it has made the results of the research community more acceptable, more trustworthy for other people. We do not want to go back to the days when a certain group of people were shut out from the research community, and those people were deprived of the benefits of scientific research. That is the terrible thing. The DEI movement grew out of trying to correct that. In doing so, it has, I think, gone too far in various respects and made some mistakes. And that's just the sort of thing that calls for the detailed ethical investigation that I've been talking about in much of my work.
Merci.
Thank you. Could you please elaborate on the recommendations you would suggest to, for example, modify the funding criteria and avoid excluding people once again on the basis of anything other than scientific merit?
I think it's advisable to try to train and find young people in various marginalized groups who can then go forward to become equal researchers and leaders of a research community down the road. The best work that I know of that's being done with respect to DEI is work that is trying to train members of communities that have previously been marginalized so they will be able to compete on equal terms with others. That has been successful in some cases. There's still work to be done with respect to that. But I don't believe that what one wants to do is foster an inferior group of people who are not only regarded by outsiders as being there because of some particular extraneous characteristic, but also regard themselves as having been the beneficiaries of some kind of largesse. We do want to make this a level playing field, but we also have to realize that for some groups in our societies, the field is currently not level, and they need help to get them to a stage at which they can compete on equal terms with others.
Thank you.
That's the fundamental point.
Okay, great. That's our time. So now for the final 6 minutes of this round, it'll be MP Cannings for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you both for being with us today, especially after the frustration of our last meeting. So I'd like to start with Professor Kitcher. And, when I heard you were coming, I went online and I watched your McFarland Center lecture with great interest. I wish we had that full time to go into some of the more broader details of science and society. But here in Canada, I'm not sure if you know, but the government is trying to develop an agency and a sort of an umbrella agency over what we have now as three major research funding organizations, one for the natural sciences and engineering, one for social sciences, and one for health, and have a broader, what they call the capstone organization over top of that. And part of that reasoning is to make it easier to develop and fund mission-driven science projects. And I think you touched on, some of that need to have science that is mission-driven to help the broader public in urgent needs. And I'm just wondering, my question to the government on this is, who is going to choose what mission we take on? And I'm just wondering if you could perhaps comment on that if you were developing such an agency.
So I think what you need to do is get a list of priorities for of people's needs in your society that might be accessible to scientific technology if research of various kinds was done. Mission-directed science is by no means everything. There has to be basic understanding of things. That's the way in which great projects develop. I mean, we wouldn't have contemporary molecular medicine had it not been for the fact that in the early 20th century, instead of going straight ahead of trying to use genetics to do something about human health, Thomas Morgan just investigated fruit flies. So I mean, mission is not everything.
Exactly, and I don't think this organization is meant to replace basic science, right, curiosity-driven science. It's meant to add another layer that could direct our mission-driven science in a better way. So I just wanted to explain that. But I guess it comes back to the question: if we develop these priorities, who's developing the priorities, and who should be involved in that conversation, and how?
It has to be an interaction between the general public, representatives of the general public, representative of constituencies that can be identified in advance as having problems on the one hand, and scientific researchers. You've got to try to match up research projects with human needs. Then what you'll need to know is what the scientists envisage they are going to be able to do and what the public needs. I've written at some length on this, and the chapter 5 of my book, Science in a Democratic Society, is really about what I call well-ordered science, which is when this match is worked out and tries to come together. That's the best I can do in a minute or two.
Mr. Kennings, you're on mute.
Sorry, I just wanted to give you some time to perhaps react to Dr. Robson's statements about, how government supported universities and research mold students' minds, and, we have to get away from that. He doesn't want the federal government to pay for research. He wants provincial governments. And I'm just wondering how that would work. You would think then that provincial governments would mold students' minds, or if we went to private universities and private companies, they would be molding student minds. I mean, that's really the job of universities, is to, give students a good education. And I'm just wondering again if you could comment on that broader question of, how we provide that education in an open and transparent and fair manner.
Well, the first thing I want to say is hurrah, because universities are all about training and educating people and broadening their perspectives. I have taught at 3 public universities in the United States, and finally at Columbia, which is, of course, a private university. I have not taught at a university where I felt the students were indoctrinated. I feel that in all of the universities that I entered, many different perspectives were offered to the students. It's especially evident at Columbia, where students in Columbia College have to take a course which covers a whole broad range of voices from, basically not only the Western tradition, but also other traditions as well. But within the Western tradition, it includes conservatives and liberals. It includes people who are highly radical on both ends of the spectrum. And I think that's a wonderful thing to offer students, that huge, rich menu of options for their thinking. So I have not seen what Dr. Robson has seen. And I think if I had seen a lot of that, I might well be as skeptical as he is about indoctrination. But I think that's not a fact.
Thank you, and that's our time. So
Thank you.
now I'm going to turn it over to MP Tucker to kick off the second round for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. And turning my attention to Dr. Kitchen, DEI, no one's disagreeing the intent of DEI. It's just how it's been rolled out in circumstances that marginalizes people. And the morally bankrupt factor is that it is indirectly doing what it's, apparently trying to stop, which is a little bit hypocritical. But could you unpack a little bit more about how DEI can be morally bankrupting if used improperly? I think you're on mute again. Could you restart? You're on mute.
I'm sorry. As you could probably tell, I'm not technologically terribly good. Am I now
you're back.
Okay, good.
We can see and hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, good. I didn't catch the first part of your question. I think you seemed to want me to say something about how DEI, if done properly, would become morally bankrupt.
No,
well, I think
improperly.
it's done properly.
Yeah.
Improperly. Okay, so I think that what this has encouraged, what the DEI, as it's actually been done, has encouraged is a policy of exclusion. And I think the concern that originally started it was one to try to train and educate and help people who had been marginalized, whose resources had not enabled them to participate fully in various parts of society, including the higher academic sphere, including scientific research. And they should have been given opportunities to do that long, long ago. Those opportunities were belated. And when they came, they suddenly contributed to the idea that only people from certain perspectives can investigate certain kinds of things. And that was a terrible blunder.
Thank you for that. I'm going to split my time now with Brennan for the remainder.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. I'd like to start with Mr. Robson. I will echo some of your comments as someone who has been to university rather recently compared to many of my Member of Parliament colleagues here. There is, and for Mr. Kitcher's experience, there is absolutely much indoctrination that happens at universities. In fact, I was almost terrified to share any of my conservative views in classrooms until I grew enough confidence to do so. Proudly stood up, but most people get shouted out of those rooms and are terrified to express anything other than what the so-called mainstream belief amongst university students is. But I am in no way actually opposed to basic research or some of the more technical research. Mr. Kitcher, you mentioned things like genetic research. I come from an ag background. The development of CRISPR technology is going to be an absolute game changer in terms of agriculture and potentially for pre-existing human conditions that we could help prevent with those ethical boundaries certainly being respected. But my question is, starting with Mr. Robson, how do we evaluate? I think there's the technical and economic-driven research, and Mr. Kitcher mentioned how do we measure that? And I think we need to look at how much commercialization happens, how many patents emerging out of this, how many jobs are created out of this, versus some of the studies that my colleague, Mr. Tucker, which there are numerous ones, and yeah, it's only 37 grand here and there, but they are ridiculous studies. So how do we do a better job of prioritizing research that's actually going to make a difference to society and to our nation versus some of these, I don't even know what you call that type of research.
To be honest, I don't think you can. As I was saying earlier, you have other things you need to be doing. But this idea of trying to track out what the economic, social, and cultural impacts of some piece of scientific research are going to be a decade down the road, nobody knows that. But nobody needs to know it. Scientists are curious people. They will do fundamental research. It isn't something you have to be concerned with. And if it turns out to have commercial applications, companies will take advantage of that. There will be useful collaboration. All kinds of things happen under a system of spontaneous liberty that do not happen under a system of political control. So I think that having the federal government trying to put a committee on top of 3 committees to tell scientists what they ought to be doing in the interest of the economy is to misunderstand what you're capable of and what the situation actually requires. If scientists are given jobs, they will go and do research because they want to know what the heck's going on in the lab. Thank you,
Mr. Robson. I'll turn over to Mr. Kitcher because I did mention a couple of points that he made there, and I'll give you an opportunity to further expand. And you mentioned, I believe, track records was your wording. My question would be, who holds that data that would be the best way to measure the track records of previous research and compare it going forward so that whoever is deciding where this funding research is going, how do they best measure where it is going to be likely successful in the future for human development?
I think if you go to the biomedical community, they know quite a lot about which kinds of programs have been successful and what kinds of things have not worked out very well. I think scientists are actually sometimes extremely good at measuring this. But I will say one thing in response also, if I may, to one of your other points. For many years, I have taught courses in contemporary moral problems, and I have had students in those courses who held views that were far more conservative than mine. Also, I've had students who sometimes held views that were far more liberal than mine. None of those students has ever felt intimidated or unable to speak up in class. I mean,
but you are a very nice man, so I suspect that may be the case, but not every professor is like that scenario. And I'll just perhaps go back to Mr. Robson quickly.
We're actually over our time, but anyway, thank you so much. So now I will turn it over to MP Joguin for 2.5 minutes. I'm sorry. I got lost of papers. MP Longfield, you have the floor for 5 minutes of questions.
Great, thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. It's good to have diverse opinions and discussion in our committee. I'm going to be turning my questions to Dr. Kitcher. So if you want to put yourself on unmute, I've got a few questions. I'm currently doing a master's in leadership at the University of Guelph, and I would have loved to have you around for our ethics course that we did a couple of courses back. We were studying Joshua Green's book, Moral Tribes, and the tragedy of the commons, which has many meanings or double meanings for me. Every time I'm reading, I'm thinking of how tribalism gets into in the way of good decision making. I think some of what we're talking about here is the tragedy of the commons, that we have limited resources that are being shared amongst researchers and trying to look at how decisions are made to be equitable to researchers, whether they're from a small school or a large school, from different ethnic backgrounds, from different cultural backgrounds, language backgrounds, to make sure in Canada French research is recognized and accounted for in our decisions. Could you maybe give us a quick snippet on the tragedy of the commons as it pertains to research funding?
Well, I think you're dead right. Actually, I do think that because what you've got is limited resources. What you tend to find is that people look around for allies. They form groups. Those groups become tribes, and then you're really off to the races. And I think you've offered a very good answer and a very good diagnosis to some of the things that were said by earlier speakers, some of the questions that were posed. When they were talking about what has gone wrong with DEI, it is perhaps in large measure the fact that when you have a movement to try to compensate some people who've been historically marginalized, those people are hungry and eager that for this to happen quickly. They want to consume a larger share of the resources than is prepared to give to them. They form alliances. Then what you start to get is a competition that can easily turn into Nissan. And this is not good. So, I mean, there's a sense in which, but this doesn't come simply out of the lack of resources. There are occasions on which groups of people, realizing that there's a lack of resources, can do better than that.
Right.
And what is needed is, I think, always the ethical perspective. There needs to be a place where ethical discussion happens among people, where people reach compromises, where they agree to share and take away less than what they originally thought they needed.
Thank you, and it is great to have a professor emeritus in the room. With your experience, and you've seen different, I guess, generations of research going away from the humanities and into the sciences, ignoring social sciences as one of the key areas, critical thinking being under assault, especially with the social media. Could you comment on the importance of also having diverse funding in the streams, including social sciences?
I think social science research is very important. It's also very hard to do. And there are also in the social sciences, unfortunately, fads. And when fads get identified, then there's an unwillingness to continue the funding in that kind of area. And so cash funding starts to seep away. I mean, look, I have seen in my academic lifetime a considerable number of movements, some of which have been remarkably successful and remarkably profitable. Some of them have withered even after quite a lot of money was invested into them. And that is something I think one has to come to terms with in research. Not everything is going to succeed. Scientists, social scientists will not always know what the profitable directions are. It's natural to be disappointed when money is invested and nothing comes out of it. But I think you have to look at the large picture. And the large picture... Yeah.
In my one notes from last time, you said you have to be patient.
Yeah.
In your first meeting with us.
That's exactly right. I mean, funders have to be patient. Good things can happen, but there is a danger of thinking that, you know, we've invested this, we want our return.
Right.
And sometimes it takes a lot of time. And that's why basic research often suffers, because people are impatient.
Thank you. Well, the chair is just about to interrupt us, so I'll just interrupt it before she does that and say thank you so much for your time.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Interesting conversation. So now we will turn to MP Blanchard-Chilcot for 2.5 minutes, please.
Si, Madame la Présidente, je poursuis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll continue with you, Professor Kitcher. You highlighted the importance of intellectual diversity in academic environment. Do you think EDI policies, by including some promising researchers who don't meet the criteria, could prompt them to leave for countries where those same policies are not applied?
I think that obviously has been happening. One of the witnesses who is not here today, who was here last time, clearly felt that that she wanted out of the whole system because of this. I feel that's terribly sad. What I would like to see happen is when that starts to irritate people, to make them feel unwanted, to make them feel unappreciated, I think that there should be some mechanism through which they can try to correct the ways in which what bothers them is being handled. I think we might have gotten a much better outcome from the DEI policies that have existed if we had been aware at a much earlier stage of the dangers of going overboard. I think if there had been more conversation, more serious exchange at earlier stages, we might have avoided some of the overshoots that seem to have happened and that are now causing so much trouble.
Merci. Je pose...
Thank you. I'll put the same question to Mr. Robson.
Yes, I mean, I worked at the same think tank that Heather Exner-Poirot worked at because I was essentially pushed out of academia for having the wrong demographics. So, I mean, you're looking at it here, and it's a serious problem. To say you're not aware of this, I mean, people do surveys of the political leanings of the faculty, and they're overwhelmingly to the left. It's absurd. And to say that, had we been warned, well, of course you were warned. You were warned vocally about this for decades, and people just said, oh, yeah, you're a bunch of bigots. And if I may quickly tell a story, my parents got their PhDs in the late 50s. They were on the road for a couple of years, UBC, U of A. Then my dad landed a job at the University of Toronto, plum job. My mom said, if you can do it, I can do it. An opening came up in history. She got an interview. And at the end of it, the chairman said to her, well, that was a good interview, dear, but in this department, we don't hire women. And my mother fixed him with a gimlet eye and said, you're hiring this one. And they did. So there's your DEI.
D'accord. Monsieur Robson.
Right. Mr. Robson, you're aware that the U.S. is beginning to reduce EDI criteria. Do you believe that this might increase the brain drain to the United States among promising Canadian researchers?
I think there is a big risk of that. I mean, the Americans went a long way into this. And again, it's not the Americans. It's one university after another. They have thousands, very decentralized and many private. But yes, and I think it won't just be the people who are excluded, but the people who don't want to be hired on the basis of their identity, but on the basis of their research, their quality as teachers. It's unfair to treat people according to group characteristics. We finally learned that after many years of a system that was very unfair to people who were not of the demographic majority or were not men.
And that's our time.
Then we decided to do it again. Why?
And that's our time, Mr. Robson. I'm now going to turn it over to Mr. Cannings, please, for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to go back to Professor Pitcher again. Kitcher, sorry. And just give him an opportunity to react to something that Dr. Robinson, one of his themes is that there's a whole lot of things about government bureaucracy that aren't working well. We need to hire more bureaucrats to bolster areas where things aren't going well. And, we should just unload federal science, federal research, and that would pay for it. He mentioned the government spent $15 billion. The federal government spent $15 billion in post-secondary education, something that he claims is a completely provincial responsibility, which I would disagree. But don't you think this is a false dichotomy? I mean, shouldn't we be, trying to help the people in all the ways we need to? And that one of the ways is to have a good science research program. And in this age, science is the real path to innovation and wealth in a country. And Canada is way behind all the other developed countries in research investment. So can you just comment on that aspect, the ability of science to really bring good things to the economy of a country?
Well, of course, I agree completely with what you've just said. I mean, I think that it should be the case that the needs that Dr. Robson talked about, the needs of people, your infrastructure, he talked about lots of things. I'm in no position to know the facts about that, but assuming that he's right about that, those are also important. So what do you do? Well, if you increase the budget, it would be a good idea to distribute it across all of these needs. If you can't do that, you're dealing with another tragedy of the commons situation. Mr. Longfield already pointed that out. And under those circumstances, you can either do the awful, competitive game where people are sort into tribes and fight one another for limited resources, or you can try to have a rational discussion that works things out. But you are completely right. You cannot neglect science because, it's shown. I mean, the scientific community over the course of the 20th century and into this century has shown how innovation and research, federally funded, publicly funded, can produce a transformation in various societies. And the argument that Vannevar Bush gave just after the Second World War for the establishment of the National Science Foundation in the United States still applies. You've got to keep your seed corn. You've got to go on doing this research that will only pay off in future years. And it's incredibly important. And for Canada to turn its back on that, I think would be an utter disaster.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both to our witnesses for coming back. I really appreciate it. If there's anything that you didn't get a chance to cover, you may submit it in writing to the clerk. So
Thank you for inviting us.
you're welcome, and that is our
Chair?
time today.
Chair?
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Pardon?
A
Yes.
point of order.
Okay.
I'm thinking of our next meeting. We didn't have the tri-councils able to finish. We really finished we finished one half of the previous meeting. Are we going to continue with this study? I
Yes,
think we
I believe the clerk has reached out to them again to see they weren't available today. So
Right.
I'm going to
so
say,
maybe in
as,
January.
my gift to the committee was going to be, this is our last meeting today. I wasn't planning on calling a meeting Tuesday. We will resume in January. I know Mr. MP Tucker's very disappointed. You're free to meet with yourself, but in any case, yes.
On that comment, Chair, this study is, I think, exceeding everyone's expectation, and I would hope that into the new year we may want to consider extending it, especially because of the interruptions and some of the testimony that we're getting to make sure that we have the best possible report. So just hopefully just flag that idea that this report or the study is going as well as it has been. I think an extension of 4 or 5 meetings is warranted into the future in the new year for something for us to consider.
I don't think, go ahead,
I think
MP Longfield.
we could have a debate on how many meetings. I was thinking that we might have 1 or 2 more meetings, but we could talk to Mr. Blanchet-Joca and
Yes,
as well as Mr. Cannings and see what we want to do with that.
Yes, he's got the motion there. It's just that our resources are more or less over already. So, yes, I believe your motion said two meetings. Yes, I'll give the floor to you, MP
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Écoutez, mon cadeau.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My Christmas present of 4 to 5 meetings. Just a question to understand why Tuesday's meeting is being cancelled.
Struggling to get witnesses this close to Christmas. Like, if we hadn't been able to call back the witnesses for today, we were having an open dance card. We would have originally maybe done a draft report, but I didn't want to do that because I don't feel the study is finished yet. So we don't want to report when we still have outstanding witnesses. I know for sure we do want to hear the tri-councils. It was unfortunate we couldn't hear them yesterday. Works to your advantage because at least you'll be able to hear them. But, so I don't think there's any point. Most of the committee meetings for next week are being canceled.
Juste pour bien comprendre, est-ce qu'il y a eu des démarches pour...
Just so I'm clear, has anything been done to invite witnesses for next Tuesday?
Not for next Tuesday. We were trying to get for Thursday, and that was a struggle.
D'accord. Donc, je veux juste comprendre comment on fait pour savoir que ces gens...
So how can we be sure that those people won't respond if they haven't in fact been contacted?
Well, I've decided that we're not, and then as chair, I have the authority that I can cancel a meeting. I just not am calling a meeting Tuesday. I'm not canceling it, but I'm not calling it. So I could make you wait in suspense till Monday to know I'm not calling it, but so, but it's not my intention to cut the study short. I want to assure you that.
D'accord. Dans ce cas-là, vous me permettez, Madame la Présidente, de déposer la motion pour qu'on puisse...
If I may, Madam Chair, can I move my motion so that it can be passed?
Can we do that today? Is it the will of the committee to consider it today?
That's a good idea.
And I think it would be good. I'm in favor. I think that's tidy, and then we
clerk.
know. Move your motion then?
Oui. Madame la Présidente, je me permets de...
Madam Chair, I will read the motion that the committee allocate the 2 meetings following the adoption of this motion to the ongoing study on the impact of various federal funding allocation criteria and research excellence in Canada.
Je crois que ce serait pertinent qu'on puisse...
As discussed, I think it would be good to continue the discussion. I think we might hear different points of view from the witnesses coming up. I think we should continue with 2 meetings. And if my colleague Corey wants to add to that, that's my motion in any case.
Is there any discussion on that, or are we ready to vote?
Chair,
Ready to vote, no
I'd
discussion.
support the motion. I wouldn't support an amendment.
I support the motion.
Mr. Cannings has his hand up. He support. So I think, pardon? Is there unanimous consent?
Yes.
That unanimous consent? Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you very much, committee. Is
Thank
it the
you.
will of the committee to adjourn?
Yes.
Merry Christmas. The meeting's adjourned.
Thank you very much.